Just a week after taking over Gabon in a military coup, the leader of the West African country's junta has been sworn in as interim president. General Brice Nguema, who led the ousting of longtime leader Ali Bongo, promised power would be returned to civilian rule after free and transparent elections. Although no date was set for the vote, crowds poured into the streets to cheer their new leader. Gabon is the latest of several former French colonies to fall to military rule, which many say shows a decline in French power and influence in the region. Let's take a look at this report. And now to further discuss the recent coups that have hit West Africa, joining me now from London is Paul Melly. He is a consulting fellow at Chatham House and specializes on the former French colonies in the Sahel region. And Michael Amoah, he is a visiting senior fellow at the London School of Economics. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Michael, why has Western Africa been experiencing so many military coups in the recent years? I mean, what's the driving force behind them?
Well, it would appear that all the military coups are in response to political situations. So, for example, starting with Sudan, they had to overthrow Omar al-Bashir. But apart from Sudan, all the remaining coups have been in Francophone countries. The coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are directly in response to what would appear to be the head of state's inability to fully address the security situations. And the coups in Guinea and Gabon are a direct response to heads of state who actually extended their presidential terms beyond 2.
So, Paul, is the current unrest in the Sahel region poised to spread to other countries?
I think that's hard to say, actually, for the reasons that Michael has given. The reasons for the coups are kind of specific to the countries, and so the security crisis in Burkina Faso and in Mali was very, very acute and led the soldiers to stage a coup. That's not necessarily a situation which will apply in other countries. Niger was a bit of an outlier because internal politics and frustrations among the military seem to have been a role there, to do with promotions and officers being dismissed and things, because the security situation was getting better. So I guess we probably need to look more at those countries where you have long-serving political regimes that, as Michael said, are trying to overstay their welcome or manipulate the system to stay on when people were not expecting it.
So, Michael, is foreign intervention a possibility, and which country or organizations are likely to intervene if this unrest continue?
Foreign intervention is not a possibility. It will be fiercely resisted. It's counterintuitive. It's not going to help the situation at all in the sub-region or in the rest of the world. Already, some of the coups, although they are national coups or local coups, are somehow an adverse situation kicking up against or pushing back against foreign interference, particularly from France. And the sentiment against the neo-colonial influence is extremely strong. So any foreign interventions to attempt to want to deal with a potential security situation is going to be fiercely resisted. And at the moment, lots of ordinary citizens in West Africa, in the Sahel, are not happy with what they are hearing. There are reports in the media, for example, that the European Union is planning missions to come and train or support countries in Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Ivory Coast against terrorist activities. And people are just not happy with it at all. They think it's just going to create foreign forces occupying the space and then perhaps maybe staging another or generating another geopolitical war in the region. And people don't want it at all.
So, Paul, are growing anti-French sentiments fueling military takeovers in the region?
Well, I think they're sort of part of the context. It's not so much that the individual takeovers are driven by the anti-French sentiment, but the soldiers know that when they take over, if they seize power, they then can play on the anti-French sentiment. And as Michael said, a wider resistance or sense of resentment against outside players. So, and this poses a really difficult situation, I think, for those outside actors. It's noticeable that the French foreign minister, in an interview she gave at the weekend, really stressed that France's stance, if you like, on the Niger crisis is particularly to stand behind ECOWAS, the West African bloc. But the problem you get is that there's actually a growing divorce, a sense of alienation between people, particularly young people in cities in Western Africa, and political leaders, the political class generally. So that although ECOWAS is, of course, the club of West African governments, West African states, it's seen by a lot of ordinary West Africans, particularly young people, as a sort of club of incumbent presidents. And so there's resentment against them. And even if outside players like France or the UN say they're backing ECOWAS, they're in a difficult position because so many people are disenchanted with ECOWAS.
So, Michael, speaking of outside players, how has China, Russia, and Turkey's rising presence in the continent been seen by both the region and countries like France?
Yes, I mean, the presence of China, Russia, Turkey poses competition for the West, particularly France and the United States. And therefore, they see that as something which they also have to counter, even if some of that is also good for the sub-region. So there is this fierce, multipolar competition for resources in Africa and all the rest of it. And there's actually been a trend, for example, that particularly almost all the heads of state that have stayed there for too long are puppets of France, which France maintains in their positions just so that they'll be able to pillage the mineral resources at cheap prices. And then there are military bases there to support these heads of state to stay there for as long as they wish. So that multipolar competition across the world is there, and therefore France and part of the West are not very happy with the presence of China, Russia, and Turkey in Africa.
So, Michael, do you believe Turkey has the potential to exert its economic and military footprint and influence in Africa, or has it already been overstretched?
Well, comparatively, Turkey is overstretched, but then every nation in the world has the potential and the open door to interact with Africa. Africa has an open door policy. Obviously, other foreign powers that have been there for decades have an upper hand. So compared with Turkey, Turkey is a small player, if I should put it that way. But then the door is open for Turkey to advance its interest if it wants, just as Africa is also trying to advance its interest across the globe, particularly with the formation of the African Continental Free Trade Union, and most recently with a strong African voice to look for alternative ways of addressing climate action, climate financing, the loss and damage, particularly also addressing the issue that the biggest polluters are not trying their very best to address climate change.
So, Paul, how would the shift in the balance of power in the Sahel region look like in the near future? And is Africa on the verge of a genuine transformation?
I think there's the potential for a genuine transformation. I think it's a misreading to think that people like France or the European Union or the US are totally trying to block Russian or Chinese influence, because there's sometimes a complementarity. And certainly we've seen the French government very publicly saying that this is a multipolar world and everybody has to learn to live with it. I think sometimes these roles can be complementary, particularly in the case of actors such as China and Turkey that have a lot to contribute in economic terms. As your video images were showing, Turkey's been doing quite a lot of infrastructure construction. For example, the new airport at Dakar in Senegal, Turkish built. And the Chinese, as we know, have built railways, roads, ports, and so on. So there is a view that the outside world can move towards a sort of multipolar existence. And certainly that's what African leaders want. One of the messages that's come out in the debates over Africa's attitude towards the Ukraine-Russia situation is that African leaders don't want to be pressured into taking sides in some sort of Cold War or great power conflict. They want to feel that they can pick a range of partners for a range of different roles.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.